traveling at X
This meeting is
kilometers
being recorded.
per hour at this width and this height. And I thought, I'm just not going to do that. This does not work with my brain anymore. And so I had a talk with someone, and they put me into the, I guess, more strategic, holistic thinking place of environmental planning. So ended up doing my Bachelor of Environmental Planning from the University of Waikato. Represent best university in the country, especially in the environmental planning space, I'd say. So I ended up graduating from Waikato 2017, did a little tiki tour overseas. And when I came back, I found that the cohort that I had studied with had taken every planning job available in the region. I think a few also at the Matamata Tiako District Council. So you might be familiar with a few of my, I guess, cohort, Jennifer and others from that place. But what that meant was that I skipped town essentially, and so I came down south and came to Te Whanganui Atara and picked up a job working with a consultancy down here in environmental planning. Spent the next sort of 3 years of my life as a sponge, really learning about all the ins and outs of your environmental planning space. Got the opportunity for a bit of consenting and policy development, strategy development, and then some random things like site selection processes and demographic analysis, and the culmination of all this information to make informed decisions moving forward with. What did happen through my studies is that I guess was introduced a bit more to my Māori tanga. So as I said, grew up with my mother, who's a Pākehā woman, and my father's side of the whānau quite disconnected with their heritage of Māori whakapapa. So it was a sort of an intro to that side of me, which resonated quite deeply. So when I found myself getting into the career world, I had an inherent desire to traverse what I became quite fluent in, being the Western planning frameworks, planning talks, delivery frameworks, and all the processes and mechanisms that go along with that, but bringing in what quite, I guess, intrinsic to me was Te Ao Māori cultural values, Mana Whenua aspirations and responsibilities. So in that 3 years that I was soaking up a bit of job experience, I was finding every opportunity that I could to, I guess, enhance outcomes for Mana Whenua in the work that I was doing. One such gig saw me working with an established governance forum, Mana Whenua Governance Forum, and they sort of stripped me of the confines and restraints that typical environmental planning does, and that you need to be subjective and stay in your lane and make sure that you're only accounting for the information that's put in front of you, into a space where I was all about outcomes for Iwi and Mana Whenua. So that opened the door, I guess, to pursue a more direct career in facilitating those outcomes through the work that I'm doing. So I think most prevalently at the moment, it's the integration of Mana Whenua interests and responsibilities and delivery of structure in the broadest sense. And that's sort of the main role that I play at the moment, and it's at a few different levels. So we've got sort of smaller grassroots integration where you're working with whānau and the hapu, up until the larger infrastructure delivery where you're working with established governance forums with iwi authorities, Crown, essentially.
Very cool. That's an amazing personal journey to where you've gotten now. And I was noticing that your consulting group offers some workshops that are geared towards Māori values. And can you tell us a little bit more about those as well?
Yeah, absolutely can. Okay, so the space that we find ourselves in environmental planning, resource management, we've seen clear growth and demand on being able to respond to and deliver outcomes for the aspirations of iwi, hapu and whānau across the country. And these are getting echoed in the big reforms that we've got coming out now. So we've got the NBA, Spatial Planning Act, Three Waters Reform. There's, I think, 1,700 pages of legislation reform documents out there for us all to read. So I'm sure we're all getting quite excited about that. But they're all pointing towards this, I guess, being able to provide for these outcomes and aspirations of Mana Whenua, but also empowering Mana Whenua to be a part of those processes. And so Wikaira Consulting have been playing in that space for a while, in a space where they're able to awhi and tautoko practitioners on the Western side, but also hopefully empower Mana Whenua on the other side to integrate this into those processes. And so to date, that's sort of been done through providing the planning for Māori values courses as part of the NZPI accreditation. So I think if you want to become a full member of the NZPI, you need to do the advanced course. But the focus on these is to build the confidence and capabilities of planners generally to engage in this space, to be able to ask the question of how is this impacting Mana Whenua? How does this provide for their interests and outcomes and responsibilities? And respond to te tiriti, I guess, in another sort of holistic nutshell sense. And on the back of that, we've also seen, I think, a bit of a surge in the request for bespoke courses to be developed that are catering to a specific entity or organisation's needs, whether that's internal capacity building or how to engage externally with marae or hapu. So moving into that space too.
Amazing. And can you provide any specific examples of recent work that would be linked to Mana Whenua engagement that has placemaking components?
I definitely can. Yeah. So when you posed this question to me, I had to think back on I guess the work that I do, because you say placemaking, and it's something that I guess doesn't immediately light bulb things in my mind. I'm more of a process person, but then this prompted me to think back and think of the work that I do in terms of placemaking, and it started to make sense that it's all connected in quite a strong way. So I landed on two specific projects, I guess, to talk to today. The first one being the establishment of a kura iwi up in Taitoko. So what we've got is Mana Whenua up in Taitoko that have signalled for quite a while now that there is a desire to build a kura iwi, a full Māori immersion school year 1 to 15, as a centre of their sort of revitalisation of their Māoritanga, their reo, their tikanga. And so they have been through quite a long process of articulating that need, working in with the Minister of Education, getting even just the idea of building this kura across the line. And massive mihi to them, because all of the blood, sweat and tears that they put in was recognised, picked up, and now you've got the Ministry of Education saying we're going to work with you to develop this kura iwi. And so my involvement in that project to date has been right at the start. So the Ministry of Education have the standard process that they go through when deciding where to build new schools and new facilities. And it had been a process that was in place for the last 20 or so years. So it was tried, tested, trusted by the Ministry of Education, that it ticked the boxes that the ministry needed to tick. And it went through a sort of long listing, stage 1, fatal flaw assessment, jump into your short listing, more robust assessment against some sort of required technical criteria. And then you shot out with a few recommendations at the end. So I've done a few of these for the ministry in the past, down here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, and then a little bit further up in Porirua, and they had quite limited scope to bring in Mana Whenua aspirations, values, commentary, any of that. It was sort of dependent on looking back on council maps, looking at your sites of significance where they had been mapped, and just doing a bit of a rough ball assessment. You're quite far away from this site of significance, you know, impacting on this water body here. Here's your score for iwi stuff. And so props to the ministry, I think, noting they recognise the difference in this project, the significance of this kura iwi to Mana Whenua, and the need to develop, I guess, a bespoke process that empowered Mana Whenua to drive the outcomes and have their aspirations heard at every step. So, excuse me, take some water. So they engaged Wikaira Consulting to develop a bespoke process that did exactly that. And it's been a beautiful trip actually, because what it's done is put the final, what I described it at first is that I'll hold the pencil. When we first met with Mana Whenua and the rōpū that they put forward to work with us, I said, I'll hold the pencil and you guys move my hand, and we'll traverse this process together. And so what the first change to that process was that they empowered Mana Whenua to put forward the long list of sites that were going to be looked at. And so we started off with a collection of sites that had already gone through Mana Whenua. They said these are appropriate to us, and so use these as a starting block to, I guess, move forward with. And the real awesome part of this process was we then dissected the assessment methodology on how you would then take the long list of sites and give them a ranking or a score essentially, and end up with your recommendation at the end. That's where the real power for Mana Whenua came in, and that's when I started thinking back on this. That's when the placemaking part of this happened, because you started to tease out everything that was really important for Mana Whenua in the establishment of this kura, and the location of this kura, and the ability for this kura and the site to provide for what their aspirations were, which was far deeper than having a plot of land that you're going to chuck a classroom. And so when you started to move in through that, it was a hub of the revitalisation in the Muropukotanga. And it was a hub for all of their community, all of the Mana Whenua community, from Kaumātua down through Tamariki, and giving everyone a purpose, either to learn or to teach. They were looking for direct connection, visible connection to their taonga. So you had the ridges of Tūtere Moana over to the west, and then the ridges of the Tararuas over to the east. And then at the heart of this was the ability for Mana Whenua to practice, teach, and pass on tikanga. So Punahou, which is the lake sort of off to the left of Taitoko, a direct connection to Punahou became one of the foundations for this process for them, one of the most important parts of this kura iwi. So by picking all of that apart, we found the appropriate places within the methodology for those to influence the recommendations. And at the bottom, we had a recommended site that provided for all of these placemaking elements. What I'm going to sort of deem as placemaking elements. I'm not a placemaker perhaps, but I thought all of these considerations were the important parts of this process and the outcome for Mana Whenua, which had now heavily influenced, I guess, the outcome. And so that was a pretty special process to be a part of, and looking back on it is quite heavily related to placemaking specifically for Mana Whenua.
Really cool. So it sounds like the way it works, especially the bespoke aspect of it, is a lot of the assessment that you're able to do comes from the uniqueness of each consultation and each project. And then you're developing recommendations that are specific to those projects and kind of organizing them in a way that then will hopefully inform future things of a similar nature.
I think you've done incredibly well on sort of relaying that back to me. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I guess I'm a details process. I love rules and working through the methodical outputs. That's why I found myself in planning. But I guess what I really love to do is traversing this fine line over here, which is your Western, your process, finding where your points of influence are, and then finding what's important for Mana Whenua. And jamming that in and really switching up the system. So that was the one project. The other one.
Sorry.
I'm wondering if we're good on time, but I'll jump into the other one quick because I think it's the more potentially relatable perhaps. But the other one that I've been working river link, or Te Awakarangi, and it's a larger scale infrastructure project with a 5-way partnership between 2 councils, Waka Kotahi and the 2 iwi, Ngāti Toa Rangatira, Taranaki Whānau, Te Upoko, Te Ika. And that has been an eye-opening experience. And so again, my role is to traverse the models and the frameworks and the ways in which a significant project is delivered, and find those appropriate points of interaction and influence for Mana Whenua to ensure that through the delivery of this significant piece of infrastructure, which in the past has very much had the tendencies, well, I've seen infrastructure delivered that's just gone boom, boom. We've got a need, we've got a solution. Get in there, you build it, and you've done. But this is opening the door for Mana Whenua through their partnership with this project to articulate the connection to place, articulate how this piece of infrastructure will impact on their connection to place, what the aspirations are for what that place can feel and be like. To reimagine the way in which we interact with that environment, and I guess better give effect to specifically the responsibilities that Mana Whenua have to that environment. And so at a high level, that was done in 3 main places. So to date, the consenting of this project, where Mana Whenua had a presence in, of course, sort of cultural impact assessments and describing historic connection to that space, existing Mana Whenua values, what things such as mahina kai, what are the practices, what are the traditions that are practiced here, and the impacts on those things, along with recommendations for projects specifically to embody moving forward. A very deep presence with cultural design, cultural narrative, cultural landscape. And so they're quite lucky in the fact that Te Atiawa, Taranaki Whānau down here have a nominated, well, a few of them, but a nominated cultural design lead, which has had an intimate involvement in the project, taking the cultural narratives that have been gifted, I guess, to this program, translating them into a design response, which is then able to be, I guess, absorbed by everyone that is working on the project into the physical design, and then how it's delivered. And then the second spot was in the procurement, and having iwi sitting at the table, being an intimate part of how you establish and run your procurement process, to ensure that those that come on to this place to deliver the work understand interest, responsibilities, and outcomes that iwi are expecting from this project. And then delivery, we're yet to get to that one. So give me another year and I'm sure I'll have more to speak to on that delivery side.
The cultural design lead is a really amazing title to think about, especially with placemaking being something that folks from all sorts of backgrounds, whether they work in more official agencies and government capacities or just coming through in community-led initiatives. And I wonder if that's something that is kind of a good aspirational thing to have in projects on all levels when it comes to putting things together in public spaces. And I'm wondering from some of the details about these projects that you were referencing, if there's any developments and reforms in the last several years that have played a supportive role in improving iwi representation in strategic placemaking projects or things of that nature.
When I think of my personal experience, which is, I guess, all that I can really offer insights from, I don't believe there's been any legislative reforms or direction that has guided the outcomes. What there has been, say, on the ministry project was a recognition of the significance of this kura a iwi, te pāwana or tūtere moana. And I guess also a recognition that their standard processes that they've put in place for however X many years in the past were quite silent on how they provided for Mana Whenua involvement. And so it was a self-recognition from on their own side that they wanted to change things and do things better, which I think, well, hopefully, again, from my brief sort of stint in this world, a lot of our Crown agencies are picking up on their responsibilities to do exactly that. So you might get that coming through a bit stronger in different places. The key piece of this puzzle that enabled the really strong integration of Mana Whenua into this infrastructure delivery was the establishment of a Mana Whenua steering group. So that they have nominated representatives from the two iwi entities, two iwi authorities, and they play a governance function for this infrastructure project. That's sitting at the same level as the project board. You've also got Mana Whenua representation on your project board. And what that means is that you've just got that needed governance oversight from your iwi so that they can provide that strategic advice to establish a project that provides for their own requirements and then resource that under them. So you can have this governance role playing up here, but then they need some horsepower as well. So making sure that your collective program is embodying the actions and guidance, strategic advice that is coming down from your Mana Whenua governance partners. So that was, in my mind anyway, that was the key enabler for the integration of Mana Whenua through this infrastructure project. And I don't think it's new. We've definitely heard of Mana Whenua steering groups or Mana Whenua working groups or governance forums, shared governance forums on large infrastructure projects around the country. But what I'm hoping is that we're raising the bar, and I guess the gravity and seriousness that our partners down here have given to that group and to the outputs of their party.
Amazing. And yeah, going away from the government side of things, for anyone working in the realm of public projects and placemaking, if they were to better enable Mana Whenua involvement, what are some of the key things that you would want them to consider and do based on your experience in this field?
Better enable Mana Whenua involvement in similar sort of scenarios or projects? Or...
In similar ones, and if there's a way that this translates into just more community-led initiatives too, things that should be considered when putting together any sort of public-facing event in different spaces.
I guess trying to look at this from a different perspective. What you've got is community making projects or situations or scenarios that don't have that same degree, I guess, of Mana Whenua integration and run the risk, run quite obvious risks. You've got the provision of potentially further colonizing a space and taking away te ganga and taking away Mana Whenua's ability to integrate, I guess. What has been quite useful, I think, for both of these projects, and it would be a benefit to a I guess, a scenario where you don't have that same intimate involvement of Mana Whenua, is that what was developed was a set of kaitiaki principles. And so these were, actually, I think they strike similarities with the Te Aranga design principles or code that I think a lot of placemakers will be quite familiar with. But there was a set of principles that have been developed by Mana Whenua down here and to be used as a guide, I guess, to guide behaviours and actions to assist in the design and delivery of projects. And they were developed in a project-specific sense, but then their utility and all of the development that happens within that specific role here, well, I guess, was identified. And so what you've got are these principles. Sitting underneath these, you've got values and specific behaviours and actions that correlate back up to these principles. And these can sort of be design-based principles or behavioural-based principles, outcome-based. I guess a couple of examples to make that real was wai tai, wai Māori was one of these principles, and it was about recognizing and providing for the interconnectedness of all water, recognizing its sustenance as the life-giving source, and providing for that in the way that we interact with our environment. So you sort of take that principle when you move down through the ladder of principle, value, and actions and behaviors. What that meant for our project was we recognized all of the smaller streams that flow through the footprint, daylighted where you can, empowered them, enhanced their mana by giving back their traditional indigenous names, specifically when they had European names that had been put on them. So enhancing the mana of that wai flowing down, and where you could, if we're impacting stormwater approaches, treating it in that same notion of it's all connected. So if we're doing a state highway 2 alignment, for example, and we're impacting natural water flows, ensuring that we are improving the quality of the water before it flows down into, say, Te Awa Kairangi and down into Whanganui Tara. So that was I guess, a principle that then influenced a design response that then enhanced the mana of that waterway. That was quite a beautiful process to go through, I guess. And then the other kaitiaki principle that sprung to mind straight away was the principle of Mana Whenua. And so that guided those that were designing and delivering the project to look at this project as a living piece of Mana Whenua identity. So Mana Whenua are here in permanence, perpetuity. What happens in this law here will always be a part of them, and it should always reflect them, and it should always reflect their interests and responsibilities. And so trying to guide a delivery alliance to look at a physical project as a living, breathing piece of Mana Whenua identity, hopefully does two things. It guides their thinking to be more sympathetic to the environment and to the people, and take a more nurturing, caring approach to how you design and deliver things. But in also recognizing this as a living piece of Mana Whenua identity, guides them to include Mana Whenua as a real strong part of its delivery. And so ensuring that at all of your decision-making points, you're checking in. Have you understood the design direction that's been handed down through your cultural design response correctly? Are you giving proper effect to your kaitiaki principles and your values? And the last project I've worked on, prescription. Like prescription is key for a lot of things, and just being really overt about where those points of Mana Whenua interface sit. Where are the decision and approval points? Where are you going to call on your Mana Whenua governance arm to be an intimate part of how it's delivered? So that, again, a trickle-down effect of having some quite beautiful kaitiaki principles established and used as a guide for the delivery of projects. So I think, sorry, trying to look that back to your question, was I think there's probably a lot of existing material out there, if you don't have that direct involvement of Mana Whenua, that would guide similar thinking that you might be able to utilize in a space making scenario. But caveat that with there is no substitute for direct involvement.
That is such a beautiful lens of looking at the life of projects and their purpose, and understanding them beyond just the brief and the initial aims of bringing people together. And I definitely am really excited to dive more into those principles and understand them. And even though those are all the questions I have, with the points that you've raised, I'm interested in perhaps opening it to the group, and getting a sense of other people's experiences doing placemaking, working with Mana Whenua, and maybe some of the broader outcomes that some of the people here have had in doing that. And so, yeah, the floor is open either for questions or maybe talking about experiences working with these awarenesses. Oh, and it looks like, is Boopsy?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi,
great.
Kia ora, Marcus. That was a great korero. I just had a comment because over COVID, and I don't know if Marcus thinks it might be handy, so I'll share it in the chat. But do planners find that sometimes in Hui that they don't have the right kupu, the right words? And so what I found in my COVID response work with Mana Whenua and Iwi was that I made a cheat sheet with like karakia and that, and we created it over 2 years with Women in Urbanism. Are those like handy tools for your engagement type work?
I would say absolutely handy tools. Anything that boosts one's personal confidence to engage genuinely and meaningfully in those spaces is going to be a valuable tool to have, without a doubt. It's a scary place for a lot of non-Māori to interact with. It was a scary place for me. Sort of again recognizing grew up in a Pākehā world and taking those own steps. So I had that Māori whakapapa, but was I Māori enough? You know, is this space that I should be even playing in? And so a cheat sheet like that would have been a big help way back in my start, without a doubt. Mihi to you for doing
cool.
exactly that.
I'll share it through. Yeah, it's cool to hear that there's so much different. There's not enough people translating that kind of tikanga before the word. So from talking about like a personal experience, I guess. Yeah, because I was in so many hui and I didn't understand the words all in lockdown. So I would just write down lists of words like tika, mihi, had like multiple meetings. And then I'd call my indigenous speaking friend and go through the list without interrupting the meeting. So rather than interrupt the meeting and say, what'd you just say? What'd you just say? It's hard though, because a lot of my work is translating. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with acronyms for the, because I feel like that's a translation in itself in planning. And I purposely try to stay out of the planning world in the sense that I want to put my hand up and say, what does ADH mean? What does LD, like just random letters, right? Do you find that too as an issue that comes up, acronyms?
Yes, yeah, is definitely the short answer to that. I came into a completely new world actually about a year and 8 months ago when coming into this infrastructure project, and the number of acronyms that are attached, not even just to the planning world, but to your procurement world and to your delivery models and its to partnership agreements. It's foreign, completely foreign. So asking the questions, what does it mean? And then cheat sheets is always going to help.
We need maybe placemaking Aotearoa needs to work together to make a acronym cheat sheet with visuals.
I'd be interested in what your sort of placemaking acronyms are, if you got some.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think even just to propose, what's the proposal acronym? Denise might know. Even just that was a new one. If you're coming new to the world, right? What's the request for proposal? RFP. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. But if you're just like a local community mom that runs the Denise, we had a jinx moment. But yeah, okay, yeah. So I just wanted to, I'll share that cheat sheet in the chat if it works. And then yeah, totally Totoko, your work, and it's awesome. Namihi nui.
Kia ora.
Amazing. Yeah, we've definitely had requests for the cheat sheet in the chat. And yeah, my final thought is on the subject of cheat sheets and helpful resources. Marcus, are there any helpful resources related to the kind of work that you do or people better understanding Mana Whenua engagement that you'd recommend that they look up? And maybe we can include them as an addendum to this chat today as well.
There is a resource that comes to mind immediately, and it's my favorite document at the moment. I'm not sure of its complete sort of relation to a placemaking space, but it's called Te Mahiri Wai o Te Kāhui Taia. What I'll make sure I get a link and flick it in the chat as well. But it is an articulation of what Te Mana o Te Wai means to Mana Whenua down here in Te Whanganui Hatara. And just for any sort of context to that, it's new planning stuff. The MPS Freshwater Management 2020 introduced Te Mana o Te Wai as a legislative requirement, and said to Mana Whenua, you need to define what this means. And so I've then taken it as a bit of a Bible and resource to use in infrastructure delivery because it articulates the desired outcome states and attribute states, and even to the level of desired feeling of place, related specifically to water. And so it might, if for nothing else, it might be of benefit to just, I guess, get a feel for how Mana Whenua might articulate aspirations and outcomes in a way that is impactful for them. So in this case, it was water.
Amazing. Yeah, it would be so good to check that out. And as we are coming to the end of our chat, is there anything else, Marcus, that you feel inspired to share based on the conversation today?
One learning that I had very recently, well, I learned the same recently, is that when working with Māori, especially in placemaking scenarios, and recognizing that in placemaking you are having a direct impact on the identity of Māori to that place. You can only move at the speed of trust, and so I'll use that as a bit of a overlay onto that Ministry of Education job. There are quite a few different layers of trust that had to be worked through. So say in the first instance, the ministry had to trust that even in sort of ripping apart what was their trusted process and putting it back together, that would still ensure that the fundamental requirements for a safe and effective operating kura were given effect to. But in doing so, we also had to move at a rate where the rōpū Mana Whenua were able to trust us that we were explaining the process articulately enough so that they had the understanding that they needed to be able to interact with us, but also trust that what they were giving to us in terms of mātauranga Māori was going to be used, shared, protected, all appropriately and safely. And then bringing those two together again was another element of time, and that you had to make sure at the end of that process that both parties were still trusting in the output. So yeah, you can only move at the speed of trust was something I'd like to impart.
Cool. It's a really, really useful quote to ruminate on whenever you're embarking on something new. And thank you so much for your time today. There's definitely some research topics I'm looking forward to opening the doors to after learning more about what you do. And checking to see, does anyone have any more questions? We still have a little bit of time. So the floor is open if you've got any questions or comments you'd like to add. And you can unmute yourself and just feel free to ask them.
And just for people's references, I've chucked in a quick link to Te Mahira Wai into the chat if you wanted to have a quick look.
Thank you. And what we'll do is we'll make sure to add these links in the chat on the event as well, just so they're cross-referenceable too. And yeah, it looks like that might be wrapping us up for today. So kia ora, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with us. And just so folks know, if you're planning on coming to any of the other sessions this week, what we're going to be doing is sending the link to our registrant list the day before each subsequent event, so you can check in your inbox for those. And tomorrow's session is titled Placemaking in Public Markets, and we'll specifically be examining the question, when are markets placemaking? Mel Skinner from the Kaikoura, who is the Kaikoura market manager, and Mike Fisher, who's the former manager of the Riverside Market, will be discussing placemaking public markets and the important role that they play in communities by connecting people to place. And we can close today with karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapa nui, ki wātea kia mama te nākau, te tinana te wairua I te ara takatū. Koia rā e rongo whaka I ria ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina, hui e, Taikie. Thank you so much.
Kia ora, Robin. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Should I close out in terms of the next meeting? Great.